I wanted to actually talk a little bit about is this idea of chronodiversity, which is a sort of a fairly new term, but we're using it very actively in our studio work. It's kind of obviously borrows heavily from biodiversity. This idea of what does a healthy ecosystem look like, right? In most cases. And in most cases, you can actually define the health of an ecosystem by its diversity. And one can extend that metaphor into pretty much anything, right? The strength of a dance performance, the strength of a cultural context like food, like even a religious or a sort of a pluralistic kind of a outlook on faith and spirituality is also defined by a kind of diversity of beliefs, right? And I think one of the crises that we face as a civilization is this idea that we all live on a timeline that is dictated by our watches. That we believe in one system of time. Time is linear. Time goes second to second, and it's irreversible. We cannot inhabit anything more than this now moment, right? But I think culturally we have access to multiple different ways of engaging with time. So these are a few of the experiments that we've done in our studio. That's the shortest project we ever did. This was a sand castle built for Disney, right? So we had to build a sand castle on the beach, wait for the tide to come and wash it. So that was like a 4-hour project. It took on the grammar of spectacle, right? It was like lots of people standing around looking at it. So it takes on this very hectic kind of spectacle. You could also put weddings here, right? Like a wedding is this same category of event. And all of us know the kind of expenditure that we've recently seen as a society, right? These are slightly longer projects. Again, for television, we built miniatures. Took us 21 days, but it's got that much life. And the process involved a little bit of craft and a little bit of care and design, but it kind of ended at maybe 21 hours of work. We did Dhoom 2. So we designed all the parts that you see between Aishwarya Rai's, like, armpit. And I mean, these are the kind of environments we created. 6-month project. It takes on the life of, again, crazy deadlines, running on a treadmill, trying to find things on the phone. It's just super hectic. This is a slightly longer project. This is Smokehouse Delhi. I'm not sure if you guys have visited these outlets across India. They were hand illustrated. So we used to sit and draw each outlet. There was one, the largest one was Indiranagar actually. It took us like a month to draw. So all of us have like shoulder ache. Again, so say 12-year project, it requires you to think a little bit about longevity, right? It requires you to think about okay, what is this going to be relevant in the next 5 years, 6 years. So you think a little bit more about relevance. You think a little bit more about spends, sustainability. You think a little bit more about what does this restaurant contribute to the city fabric? Like, is it an inspiring place to be in? Is it like fun to be in? And there are certain slightly larger questions that start coming into play here. This is the Bombay Canteen. So some of the work that we did at the Bombay Canteen was actually to look back at the history of Bombay and see what are the kind of environments that we as a culture in Bombay are familiar with, right? So we are used to seeing the Irani restaurant. We're used to seeing these kind of really interesting old school formats which instantly create a sense of kinship and a sense of warmth. So the Bombay Canteen was an experiment in creating that atmosphere so the kitchen could go crazy. The kitchen could do a pork thepla and not be, stoned from outside because the space gives you that kind of cocoon of a warm embrace. This is an interesting one. So we used to run a not-for-profit restaurant at a dilapidated old bakery called Jute Bakery in Bombay. I mean, those of you who are familiar with Bombay will know there's a place called Veronica's that exists there right now. But this is the place we used to do it before it became Veronica's. And it was offered to us free of cost by the person who owned it. The conversations here were incredible. So the format of this restaurant was that a homemaker or a house help could come here. We would charge 5,000 rupees per plate, and they cooked a very elaborate 12, 13 course meal. And all the proceeds from that meal go back to the person who's cooking. So it's a small micro economy around restaurant. And so what if you take profitability outside the restaurant and say the restaurant is just a place for breaking bread together? And how can we do that in a way that actually helps the person who's cooking? Jute Bakery exists in a village that is one of the oldest hamlets in Bombay. And in our studio, we kind of started documenting the history of that village form. It took us to conversations that are 300 years old. Well, on the table, our conversations ended at 180 years because that's 4 generations of recipes that we were tasting. The sense of grammar of when you expand the sense of time, right? When you're on a table where you're eating someone's grandmother's food, the conversations that come up, you will never discuss like what happened on Big Boss. You will never discuss. It takes you back in time to a time when nostalgia rules, for a time when you say, like, why doesn't this happen more often, right? Like this, it leaves you with this itch. Like, man, I should be living my life like this. Every meal should be like this, right? So, and in the village, you're engaging with 300-year-old stories. You're looking at homes and cultures that have survived unbroken for, say, 10 generations, 12 generations. It's a privilege to operate a studio out of this village. And every year at Christmas, we decorate it and try to win the best village prize in Bandra. And we do all these things, which is actually just trying to be part of this community that's that old. I'll take you to a little bit of new work. So what this is like a run-up saying how do we expand our sense of time in the past. What are some of our new stuff is actually saying how do we expand into the future, right? How far can we look and how can we use like interesting tools like Karthik mentioned, like AI. So we use a lot of photo bashing, Midjourney, all of this to create fun speculative fiction projects. Now, this is actually around the Statue of Unity, which was unveiled. So we kind of said that, okay, what if I was given 3,000 crores and say build a statue, right? Would you build something like that? Or would you build something that's performative, that has a sense attached to it? So this is actually a Gandhi desalination plant. So you could actually have a seated Gandhi, build an entire desalination infrastructure inside him, and have a freshwater supply, sustainable supply to the city of Bombay. Same project, same statue, same infrastructure, sense, right? Like you not do something completely performative, you do something actually functional on the skyline. This is actually Netanyahu in the future, right? So, for example, if you had an AR filter that every time he appears in a public format, you could actually have on every smartphone, you could have every single victim of the genocide that is showcasing behind, right? So whenever every time he's on a public platform, you could actually have every single victim of the war that he did, which is shown to us as augmented reality. And that's, say, a project 15 years from today. As we go further into the future, we realize that architecture and design is part of the problem, right? In many ways, we are required by our current civilization to build nothing or to build with a very, very serious conscience. Like you're supposed to slow down as a culture. We don't need to speed up, right? And which is a movement in architecture which says build nothing. What do you do with all these skills, right? So you become extremely skilled dismantlers. You become a society that is actually able to find embedded value in old structures, recombine structures, have new ways of expressing architecture that don't require us to demolish buildings. Right now, when we want to make space on our skyline, we implode buildings, right? So that's that amount of embedded energy, embedded carbon, embedded footprint, which is just like pulverized, put into powder, and then you start building again with virgin materials. It's the kind of mindset that we used to build with in a world of abundance, but we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world of frugality, we live in a world of scarcity, and I think architecture and design has a responsibility to respond to these things. This is maybe 40 years out. There's a lot of manufacturing that can happen in outer space. Like protein folding, for example, requires a zero gravity atmosphere to kind of have more accurate protein folding. So we're looking at a situation where you have protein folding and off planet manufacturing, and it's shipped back to Earth using a series of drones. So we run all these kind of speculative experiments as a studio under the India Futures Project banner. And it's this idea of looking at Indian futures, like what is the world going to look like in the year 2035 and plus, and what are the kind of projects that we could seed. That's when ChatGPT becomes God, right? So essentially, when you realize that AI can give you more answers than God ever can, and it becomes monumental. There are corporate boardrooms that have a massive ChatGPT thing running in the background. So any business query, any kind of data crunching, you just turn back and ask ChatGPT, is this what we should do? And then there'll be a voice of God that comes and says, no, don't do this, do that. That's a workshop that's ChatGPT powered, giving real-time DIY instructions. That's maybe 65 years down the line, optimistically. I'd like to leave you with just three sort of thoughts. Like this is actually this idea of chrono expansion. Like all of us live in multiple timelines, right? Like as we are sitting here in this room, there's a certain sense of time that is passing by. I can see time's up here, but like there's a certain sense of expanded time where we all have access to, right? And all these kind of expanded notions of time come with their own grammar. The biggest thing that happens is that every single binary condition is collapsed into a spectrum. We're constantly looking at past versus future. We're constantly looking at, form follows function. There are all these kind of binary conditions that we are taught to accept, and it's given to us in our schooling. It's given to us in the kind of way we are programmed to think about gender, about intelligence, about neurodiversity. There's always normal and abnormal. But here, I think we're looking at a situation where we're working on everything has to become a spectrum. And one of the projects we're doing in the studio right now is to actually map out time as a spectrum, where you look at not past and future, but you have a rolling present, right? So it allows you to actually be informed by many things, and it allows you to kind of really, really harness the inspiration that comes from 500 years ago and also 500 years in the future. This idea of maintenance, right? Certain journeys can only be undertaken if you are a culture that's engaged with maintenance, right? If you have to take a solo yacht journey around the world, the brand of the yacht doesn't matter, the materials don't matter. It's actually how well you're able to maintain your yacht. Can you actually build and repair, and do you know that thing inside out for you to actually have a repair and maintenance outlook? And can we as a culture be a repair and maintenance culture? Can we not be the culture that takes virgin material, processes it, pulverizes it, and then takes something else new? So I think this maintenance and stewardship is something that we're really trying actively to build into our studio practice. Like as designers, do we have an afterlife analysis? We've actually recently completed a project in Bangalore called Quest, which is a campus which is actually a completely quantified building. So every single liter of water that is used in the plumbing is quantified, tagged, put back into circulation. This is the new college at Oxford. So the new college at Oxford is anything but new. It's built in the 1300s, right? And the beams that you see on top, it's actually a 2 feet by 2 feet by 40-foot beam. And it's made out of a single log of wood, right? So this is the kind of construction. Now, these beams have lasted for 800 years. And there was some inquisitive student who was an entomology master student. He was walking up in the beams and he noticed a massive beetle infestation. So what happens to oak beams over time is they get infested by beetles, and they get, this is like natural. So it gets taken over by these kind of infestations. And he brought this to the college administration saying that, okay, there is a big problem. This whole thing is going to collapse. We need to do something now. The college administration goes into panic and they realize that, man, what are we going to do? Where do we get 2 feet by 2 feet by 40 feet oak logs to replace these beams? And then they called back the Oxford Forester. Now, it's amazing that Oxford has a forestry department, right, to manage all their grounds that they own. So this forester comes back to the college after 8 years or 9 years. He's never visited the campus then. And they were telling us, we have these problems. Can you find us an inventory of trees that have, do we own trees like this? And he's like, we were wondering when you'd ask. So it seems when the beams were laid in the building, parallelly, the forestry department had planted 40 oaks, right? So they know that when the beetle infestation happens, these oak trees will be ready to harvest. So this is the kind of intergenerational kindness that one is talking about. These are the kind of projects that we need to seed as a culture, right? So in design and architecture, we have this kind of potential to do. But what we do with our projects is we draw a timeline of 5 years, or we have a timeline of 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. This myopia is really what is causing a lack of diversity in our profession, right? So we're building a small speculative futures institution in Goa. The idea is to kind of teach these as processes. We're teaching I teach personally at NID and CEPT, which are design and architecture schools, trying to influence long-term thinking into curriculum. We're also trying to run our own workshops around using craft and AI, lots of old and new kind of mixes. And thank you so much.